She changed jobs, and everything cracked. The home once filled with laughter turned cold, as if a stranger had moved in. Her husband felt he was losing more than just his wife. The very reality in which they were a family was vanishing. There was something new in her eyes. Distant, haughty, disturbingly confident. Simple conversations turned into interrogations. Familiar gestures became grounds for accusation. He didn't yet know that behind this shift lay more than just stress or fatigue. When the truth began to seep through carefully veiled hints and half-truths, it became clear there was no way back. But the most unexpected part was still to come, when those who once seemed like background figures began to play leading roles in destroying everything he was trying to save. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watched this video. I value every one of your comments. So, let's get started. Honestly, I never saw any of this coming. For years, I returned to the same partner, the woman I imagined I'd share my whole life with. Then, out of the blue, she began to transform. And this wasn't the slow, natural evolution that happens to everyone as time passes. No, this was a total reversal. Everything shifted when she started a new job about 5 months back. Initially, I was genuinely thrilled for her. It seemed like a positive change. She'd be out in the world more, meeting people, doing work she was passionate about. I expected her to come home with amusing stories from the office or chat with me about her day the way she always did. But gradually, things started feeling off. She got close to a new set of colleagues, and I really did try to be encouraging. She had every right to her own friends and independence. But these people were nothing like those she used to surround herself with. This new crowd seemed to stand against the foundation we'd spent years building. These so-called friends, they weren't upbeat or supportive. Instead, they championed this narrative that all men were the problem, that men were by default oppressive or controlling. Even simple acts like holding a door open were twisted into something negative. At first, I shrugged it off, chalking it up to a strange sense of humor. But after a while, I could see my wife was changing fast. Small gestures she once valued suddenly became points of contention. For example, I'd bring her coffee in the morning, like I always had, but now, instead of smiling, she'd glare at me or argue that she wasn't dependent on anyone. It felt like every nice thing I did was suddenly seen as some kind of insult, and this wasn't just an isolated incident. This dynamic became our new normal. Every day we'd end up in an argument over the tiniest things, and I began to tiptoe around my own home, never knowing what might trigger her next. One evening, I made dinner, a routine thing for me, but she accused me of trying to undermine her independence, as though my cooking was an insult to her abilities. I was shocked, but this became our reality. Day by day, the situation worsened. She'd insist that just by being male, I was somehow the obstacle holding her back. We have 2 kids, both still young, and they watched us morph from joyful parents into tense, distant strangers. Our daughter once asked me why her mother never smiled anymore. What was I supposed to tell her? How do you explain to a child that her mom is no longer the person she knew? After 2 months of this, it was painfully obvious this wasn't just some temporary mood or work-related stress. It felt like my wife had adopted an entirely new worldview overnight, and I was now cast as the enemy. She began dredging up alleged wrongs from years past, incidents that either never took place or were so insignificant I'd forgotten them. Suddenly, I was accused of being oppressive, of being the root of all her problems. Whenever I tried to defend myself, she'd accuse me of being defensive, supposedly more proof that I was guilty. I wish I could say I handled things well, but honestly, I was completely overwhelmed. The woman I loved and married was gone, replaced by someone intent on destroying everything we'd shared. Every day, I'd come home bracing for whatever fresh accusation or argument awaited me. It wore me down, and I kept questioning what I could have possibly done wrong. But in truth, all I'd done was just be there. Around this time, the atmosphere in our home changed completely. It wasn't just the constant fighting or her coldness. There was something deeper at play. One night, she didn't come home until well after midnight, and she didn't even bother to text. When she finally did arrive, she was clearly drunk, detached, barely acknowledging me, and went straight to bed without a word. The next day, I tried to talk about it, asked her why she hadn't let me know where she was. She lashed out, accusing me of trying to control her and insisting I was overanalyzing everything. This became a pattern. She'd vanish without notice, return distant and cold, treating me like I was just an inconvenience. I began to feel like a stranger in my own relationship, always waiting for the next unpredictable blow-up over whatever supposed mistake I'd made. Eventually, I couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was going on. The thought that she might be seeing someone else crossed my mind more than once, but I didn't want to accept it. After 11 years together, with a family and a shared history, how could things unravel so completely? I started to quietly check her phone when she left it unattended, hoping for reassurance, but never found definitive evidence. Then, one night, I managed to look through some of her messages. That's when I saw texts between her and one of her new friends discussing how she would talk to me about opening up our relationship. At that moment, it all clicked. She was already involved with someone else. She never confessed any of this to me directly. Instead, she tried to slip it into a casual breakfast conversation, as if it were no big deal. She asked, "How would you feel about an open relationship?" But I was prepared. I'd already seen the messages. I didn't react the way she expected. I recorded our conversation to protect myself and went straight into questioning her. I asked her directly, "Who is he?" She stared at me blankly, pretending not to understand, but I pressed her. "You're seeing someone else. Don't talk down to me." At first, she tried to deny everything, then played it off with a forced chuckle, but I could see the cracks forming in her facade. Eventually, she admitted to having slept with 2 different people for just a night, as if it was nothing of consequence. I wasn't yelling or losing my temper. I just needed the truth. When I pressed her further, she ultimately revealed she'd gotten involved with someone from her job. She insisted she had every right to continue seeing him if she pleased, and, unbelievably, claimed it was actually a positive thing for her. I was left speechless. My wife, the mother of my children, was telling me to my face that she had no intention of ending her affair. To make matters worse, she even offered to introduce me to one of her friends, suggesting that this twisted arrangement could be best for everyone, and that happiness was still possible for us if only we accepted it. The way she looked at me, as if she were giving me some sort of gift, was surreal. In that moment, I realized she felt no remorse, and any respect she once had for me was gone. I withdrew into silence, retreating into my office and sitting there in the darkness, determined to uncover the whole story. I downloaded a program that could recover deleted messages, installed it on her phone, and finally saw the truth she'd hidden from me. The texts, the pictures, the unmistakable proof. It was all there, and somehow even worse than I had feared. When I confronted her again, I still wasn't shouting. I didn't break down or plead for anything. All I wanted was the truth, both for my own sake and for whatever dignity was left in our relationship. She had already done so much damage, but I still needed to know if there was even the slightest bit of regret in her. I calmly repeated my question, "Who is he?" For an instant, I thought she might finally be honest, but she quickly reverted to denial, pretending she had no idea what I was talking about. That last bit of self-control I was clinging to broke. I looked her in the eyes and told her directly, "Don't lie, I already know everything. Just be straight with me, tell me who you've been with." That's when her defenses started to crumble. She admitted again to seeing a couple of men but tried to minimize it, calling it just fun, no more meaningful than meeting up with colleagues. I pressed her about her coworker, and eventually, she admitted it was more than a fling. It had lasted weeks, and in her mind, she hadn't done anything wrong. Then she said the words that truly shattered me. She planned to keep seeing him. Her complete lack of shame was overwhelming. She kept repeating that it was something good for her, and insisted that I had no right to dictate her choices. When I pointed out how selfish and disrespectful her behavior was, she turned it back on me, accusing me of being possessive and controlling. That became her shield. She claimed this was about escaping the limits of marriage. She began ranting about how I'd never supported her, how our life together had always made her feel trapped. After more than a decade, I was suddenly painted as the villain. She spoke to me as if I were a stranger, or worse, her enemy. She even suggested that maybe I should start dating her friend, insisting that might be better for me too. She said it with a smug look, as if she was doing me a favor by offering me a consolation prize. She made it clear she saw herself as the one in charge now, and I was just expected to go along with whatever new arrangement she wanted. Standing there, I barely recognized the woman in front of me. It was as if the person I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who was mocking the life we had built. I refused to let her degrade me any further, so I demanded her phone. She scoffed at first, acting like she had nothing to conceal. I kept my expression neutral until she finally handed it over, probably assuming I would just return it. I shut myself in my office again, ran the recovery tool, and watched as it unearthed everything she thought was gone. What I found was even more devastating than I had feared. There were secret plans, rendezvous, conversations about me, things she had confided in him and in her friends. She'd done her best to erase it all, but there it was, undeniable. After about 30 minutes, I gave her back the phone. She must have sensed that everything had changed, because she immediately tried to explain herself. But I was done listening. I asked her to leave. She erupted, yelling that I was being controlling, that men always tried to dominate women's lives, and that I had to accept her choices. I didn't say another word. I just began gathering her belongings as she screamed. I was finished. As I led her to the door, I told her she was free, that nothing would tie her down anymore. I said I'd be contacting my lawyer in the morning. Before she could respond, I closed the door behind her. In that moment, I realized something without a doubt. I could not spend another day living under the same roof as someone who held so little respect for me or our family. The life we'd shared was over, and she could pursue whatever freedom she wanted, just not with me. In the days that followed her departure, I replayed every word, every lie, every insult, trying to understand how everything could unravel so fast. But there were no answers. Nothing could explain how she could throw away more than a decade together so carelessly. If she could dismiss me and our family that easily, I refused to just stand by and let her act like it was acceptable. I decided to take a stand. I wanted her to know I wouldn't just sit quietly and take it. She needed to see the reality of her actions. The one thing I knew for sure was that her relationship with that coworker had gone on for a while. She'd been deceiving not just me, but probably his family as well. After some digging online, I eventually stumbled across his wife's Facebook profile and decided to contact her directly. I didn't sugarcoat anything. My message was candid, describing exactly what had transpired between her husband and my wife, along with several recovered screenshots as proof. I left no room for misinterpretation. My words were direct and unfiltered. Once I pressed send, I had a strong sense that the situation was about to shift dramatically. I didn't expect her to reply right away, but she surprised me by responding much sooner than I thought she would. Her response was a mix of disbelief and devastation, yet she thanked me for being straightforward and even confessed that she'd had her own suspicions for a while. Oddly, I felt a measure of relief knowing I wasn't the only one caught in this ordeal. Not long after, she sent me a video she'd recorded, a confrontation at a motel where she burst in on the two of them. The footage was raw chaos. Her voice rang out, catching them completely off guard as my wife scrambled to get dressed and stumbled through her excuses. Watching it was pure torment. Still, there was a strange sense of justice to it all. Soon after, my wife must have realized the full extent of the fallout because she started flooding my phone with messages. She oscillated between apologies and accusations, blaming me for being heartless enough to inform the other woman. She argued that I had crossed some boundary, disregarding the fact that she had already shattered my trust. By then, I found it impossible to feel any sympathy for her. She had made her choices, and now she was finally facing the aftermath. That's when her friends started to involve themselves. They began sending me messages, acting as her self-appointed defenders, accusing me of being vengeful and controlling. Someone even dared to suggest I should have agreed to her suggestion of an open marriage. Another person tried to guilt me, saying I was setting a terrible example for our children by not supporting my wife's so-called freedom. It felt as if everything had been turned upside down, as though I was expected to accept whatever she wanted without objection. But things became even more disturbing. One of her friends, who, I would later learn, had done something similar in her own marriage, advised my wife that, if I kept resisting, she could use the legal system against me. Just accuse him of abuse, she suggested. It happens to men all the time. That thought chilled me to the bone. All I had ever tried to do was support my wife and hold our family together, and now someone was advising her to destroy my reputation and life with a lie. The very idea that this was a possibility made me furious. That evening, I realized I needed to take steps to safeguard myself and my kids. I ordered security cameras for our home and created digital backups of every piece of evidence I had collected. I was determined to leave nothing to chance. This had grown far beyond a case of infidelity. It was now a matter of protecting my future and my children from further deception. I stopped looking for explanations or closure. I had given everything to our marriage, and she had tossed it aside without a second thought. If she wanted out, that was her decision, but I wasn't going to stand by and let her trample over me any longer. From that point forward, my focus was on ensuring the well-being of my children and myself. I was determined not to let her or her friends twist the story to make her out as the victim. She was responsible for her actions, and I would not let her escape accountability. Once everything unraveled, I knew I had to prioritize divorce and custody. My children were already affected. They could sense the tension and notice their mother's changed behavior. With everything falling apart, I reached out to a lawyer a friend recommended, someone well-versed in complex, high-conflict cases. We went over every detail, the screenshots, the confrontation video, even the threats from her friends. My attorney said it was a solid start, but urged me to keep collecting as much evidence as possible to strengthen my case for custody. So I began keeping detailed records. I installed more cameras and saved every text, every phone call. Living with this level of vigilance in my own home was draining, but I couldn't afford to be careless. Given the threats I had received, my lawyer also advised that I seek a restraining order, something I never thought I would have to do against my own wife. But there I was. The reality of the situation hit hard the day I filed those papers. My wife had become someone I could barely recognize, and my children needed protection from the turmoil. Tensions escalated once she was served. She showed up unannounced at my parents' house on Christmas, demanding to see the kids and fix things. Her emotions were all over the place. One moment enraged, the next pleading, as if she couldn't comprehend the harm she'd caused. In the end, my father had to threaten to call the police before she would leave. That incident was the final straw for me. I realized then that she had no real understanding or care for how much pain she was inflicting, especially on our children. Things deteriorated further when she started reaching out to our mutual friends, claiming she was the wronged party and casting me as controlling for refusing to accept her new lifestyle. Some friends immediately distanced themselves from her, but others, people I thought I could rely on, took her side, arguing I should go along with it for the sake of the kids. It was clear she was trying to manipulate those around us, desperate to protect her own image. The divorce itself was grueling. Her attorney used every tactic imaginable, accusing me of emotional instability, claiming I was being financially abusive by restricting her access to our accounts, despite the fact that I'd always provided for our family. It was just another attempt to paint me as the antagonist. She pushed for shared custody, insisting that our children needed both parents equally. I had seen enough to understand the environment she chose for herself, and I couldn't let my kids become entangled in that world. Together with my lawyer, we decided to be relentless, using every shred of proof at our disposal. We had the messages where she tore me down, a video from her lover's wife, and even audio recordings of her plotting with friends about inventing false claims if things turned against her. Honestly, it felt like a relentless battle just to prove that I was a devoted father, a steady presence who only wanted a safe life for his children. Each appearance in court, every meeting with my attorney, I had to refocus on what truly mattered. This wasn't about vengeance or about coming out on top. My sole intention was to protect my children from the person she had become. When the custody ordeal finally concluded, I felt like the experience had aged me a decade. Still, I knew I would withstand anything if it meant my kids could grow up in a safe and nurturing home. In the end, her own self-destructive decisions worked against her, and my lawyer was certain that things would go our way. But this victory wasn't the kind I'd wished for. I was completely drained, hollowed out by the collapse of the life I once knew. When the divorce became official, I thought I'd feel some relief, a sense that the weight had finally been lifted. Instead, all I felt was a deep void. So there I was, legally free, but with two children staring up at me, struggling to grasp why their mother wasn't coming back. I tried to shield them from the ugliest truths, but they had already seen more than any child should ever have to. With custody now decided, my job was to help them see they weren't to blame and to rebuild a sense of normal life. After court, I brought the kids to my parents' house. Their unwavering support had been a lifeline for me, and knowing I could count on them was one of the few things helping me hold it together. My parents did what they could to keep the kids distracted while I sat alone, trying to come to terms with it all. The realization was sinking in. Life would never return to the way it was before. The woman I'd loved, the person I had planned to spend forever with, was now like a stranger. Worse, she was still deeply caught up with the same group of people who had fueled her decline. Word eventually reached me that her situation had worsened. She'd sunk deeper into substance abuse, lost her job, and seemed to be spiraling further out of control. The truth hit me hard. She wasn't just neglectful, she was unraveling, taking down everything we once built together. A few weeks later, her parents contacted me with heartbreaking news. She'd been found unresponsive from an overdose and rushed to the hospital. I didn't know how to process it. Part of me was furious, angry that her choices still threatened to harm our children. But another part, the part that remembered who she used to be, was filled with grief. I wished I could feel nothing after all that had happened, but I couldn't erase the memories of better times, no matter how far she'd fallen. When she left the hospital, her parents offered her a home, on the condition that she seek treatment and stay clean. She refused, choosing instead to move in with one of those same friends. It became clear she had made her decision, and it didn't include us. Not me, not our children, not her family. I was caught between sympathy and exasperation. The person I had married no longer existed. She had become someone unrecognizable to me. One thing was undeniable. My children desperately needed stability. I began establishing routines for us, waking early to make breakfast, getting them ready for school, and doing my best to keep the home environment positive. Friends, family, and even former colleagues checked in regularly, always offering support however they could. They reassured me time and again that I was doing everything possible, that I wasn't at fault, even when self-doubt crept in. But I couldn't afford to dwell on those feelings. My children needed me more than ever. They were my top priority. Gradually, things began to look up. The kids started to laugh and smile again, finding comfort in simple things like movie nights or afternoons at the park. There was no magical solution, but those little moments of happiness meant the world to me. I wanted my kids to know that we were still a family, that we could weather any storm together. I was determined that they wouldn't feel abandoned by both parents. But then, months later, we received the most devastating news. Their mother had died of another overdose while in rehab. Telling my children was the most painful experience of my life. My daughter wondered aloud if their mother had stopped loving them, while my son simply wept in silence. I held them tightly, assuring them that their mother did love them, despite her mistakes. They needed that reassurance, needed to believe there was still a part of her that cared, even if she had lost herself. Looking back, I'm still stunned at how quickly everything fell apart. Now, though, my focus is on building something good from what remains. My kids are growing up in circumstances I never foresaw, but they're safe, they're loved, and they're surrounded by people who truly care about them. After everything we've endured, that's what keeps me moving forward. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.